Hello everyone, today we're going to be taking a look at how we can set up a Redis container so that our Rails application can communicate with it. Pretty straightforward process overall if you know what to do. I didn't the first time I tried this a couple days ago, so it took me a couple hours to figure out. So hopefully I can save you that time and get this done in like 10 minutes. To get started, we're going to do a make dir for video, cd into video. And then in here, we're going to do a couple things. First, we're going to do a touch for readme.md to create that file. We're then going to do a make dir for the Redis directory. And then inside of the Redis directory, we can do a touch for a Docker file, something like that. And actually, I think we're done here. So we're going to exit out of here and then do a code dot from the root of our project. So in here, if I close all of this, we can come over to the README, because that's the first thing I want to talk about. In the README, we're going to have a bunch of directions, and the reason why we're using a README is because it's going to be in the video description as a GitHub repository. So if you want to copy any of these commands, you don't want to type them yourself, I'm not going to fault you for it. You're just going to want to come to the GitHub repo, grab them, and then you should be golden. So for the setup here, we have a couple steps. We're going to start with the Redis ones because it's pretty straightforward. In the Redis Docker file, we need to actually create this. So for the Redis block, it's just going to be this. So what we do is we say from Redis latest. We then expose port 6400. We're not using 6379, although it is the default, because you might accidentally connect to the Redis server that's running on your computer, and we want to make sure this is explicitly working, and then afterwards you can change it back to, like, I guess 6381 would probably be like the production port or something. But we say 6400 here because the YouTube man tells us to, and then we run redis-server with a -- port of 6400. Okay, so that's it for that. How do we actually build and run this? Well, that's pretty simple. First, we have to, because we're in the video directory and not the Redis directory, we have to prepend our path here for the execution with the /redis, so it goes into the Redis directory, and then the dot is just telling it to run the Docker file in there. So if we run this, it should hopefully build that. The next step we have to do is, I'm going to copy this command over. We have to do a Docker run where we pass in a network. So to do this, we're going to do a Docker network. We can run this command and see all of the options we have. I'm going to run a Docker network RM for Rails because I already had that as a created network. And then you can follow along by running a Docker network create, and then just call it the Rails network if you're so inclined. Now, if we do a Docker network ps, ls, we should be good to see that we have a Rails network running down here, and then you should be good to go. Now that we've done that, we can give this a name of Redis_app, a -p where we pass in the host port of 6400 and the Docker port of 6400. We pass in -d so it runs in the background. It doesn't run as a console that we can exit out of with Control-C. And then we use the Redis_image that we just built up here. So let's go ahead and let's run this. Hit enter, and that should spin up. If we open up our Windows GUI for our Docker stuff, we can hopefully see that there's a Redis app running. And if we come in here and view the details, we can see that there's some stuff happening that I don't know about, and it scares me. But we can also come into our console and just do a Docker container ls. And we can see that this Redis image has been up for 17 seconds. Okay, so what we want to do is we now want to create our Rails app. So to create this, we're going to just do a Rails new. We'll say Rails new, I'll call it video. Actually, let's do like Rails_demo, and then we'll pass in --main because we're already in the video directory. It's going to be a little bit confusing if we do it like that. Okay, now we can come into the video directory. So I'll just hit F11. I'll cd into the Rails demo, I think we called it. And then from in here, we'll do a Rails G controller pages home to create our home page. And then we can do a Rails G channel, and we'll call it the message channel. That way we can use action cable to test this. Next step is to exit out of here, come into the Rails application, and then in our config and our routes.rb, we want to change this get to a root and the / to a hash. After we do that, we can exit out of the routes. We can exit out of the Docker file for Redis. We can come into the Docker file for Rails because in here we have to do a couple things. The first one is going to be to set the master key. So Rails requires a master key if you're running it in production. We set this to the value that's inside of our config master.key. So we just copy this, paste it in here, either with quotes or without. whatever floats your boat. I'm going to use without, just to show you that it works. And then we can come down here, and then the last option we have to use is a Redis URL, which we're going to set to Redis : / and then the name of the Docker container we made, which we called Redis_app. And then we could pass in the port that it used, just like that. Now what this will do is it'll come into our Explorer, our config, and our cable.yaml file. And then down here where it sets the URL, it uses the Redis_URL environment variable. So that's going to work pretty much right out of the box. So to test this, let's come into our app, our channels, and our message channel. In the message channel, we only have to do a couple things, and I'm going to assume you're at least somewhat familiar with Action Cable here. So we're just going to stream from the message channel. And then down here, we are going to, not in the unsubscribe, down here, we're going to create a method for speak. Oops, we're going to create a method speak and then pass in some data. And we'll define what that means in a second here. So let's come into our app, our JavaScript, our channels, and our message channel. In the message channel, we want to, in the connected method, we want to call a perform. So this.perform, we'll call that speak method we just created. And then we want to pass in an object. And in here, we'll just say, I don't know, message is going to be, I just connected. How's it going, y'all? Something like that. Just make it as obnoxious as possible. So now that we've gotten our message from like the guy living in southern Texas, we can display it. So the way to display it is down here in the received. Whenever we get something received, we just want to console log it. So we'll just come down here and paste in a console log of our data. Now to actually do this, we have to grab this message in our message channel and we have to broadcast it to everyone. To do that, we can do a Action Cable server broadcast. It goes to the message channel that we define up here. It takes in a message with some data, but this is a little bit outdated, so GitHub Copilot's not quite going to unemploy us because we do need to wrap this inside of some braces. So once this is done, we should hopefully be good to go. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to run a Rails S locally to hopefully go to port 3000, go to the home page, and then if we refresh in our terminal, we should see I've just connected. How's it going? And then if we open up a new window, come over here, paste it in. It should show it a second time, as well as hopefully show something in this window as well. So you can see that they are now communicating in real time. Cool. So that's happening, but it's not happening through our production server. So to now test this, what we can do is we can build this Docker file and run it and hopefully connect to the Redis server running on 6400. So let's come into our README and we'll just copy in the commands to run and test this just to make sure we're doing everything okay. So in the building block, I'm just going to copy these. We come in here and we do 3 backticks and put this in because you can always specify what the language is. That's why I always do that. So maybe this is like a bash thing, and then you can come over to the preview if you have the extension, and then you can see it gives you a little bit of highlighting. So we're going to run this by doing the build. We are in the Rails demo, so I'm going to cd out to the root of our project and then run the build command. That should go through and build everything. While that's doing that, we can just come into, I guess we'll just wait for this to finish. All right, now that that's done, we can go ahead and create our Docker volume. Just run that, and now we can run the Docker run command. So I'm going to hit Control L here, paste this in. We can talk about this. It's a Docker run with a --rm-it. And then we pass in the name of the Rails app. These are just basic Docker run flags. We then do a -d to daemonize it, the --network of Rails that we created earlier. We tell it the port is 3000:3000, and then we pass in the app as the image name. We go ahead and we run that. Now let's come over to localhost port 3000 and refresh. You can see here that this is working. It's actually going through the Redis server instead of the default Rails stuff. So how can we test this though? You don't want to just take the scary YouTuber's word for it. Maybe we want to test that this is working. So the first thing is in our Redis commands, we do need to make sure that this is working. So we're going to come into our Redis building, do a couple of backticks, paste this in, and then in our testing block, we can make sure that we are doing the tests properly, just like that. So to test this, let's come into the Docker exec or the Redis testing block, and then we'll do a Docker exec -it for Redis app, Redis-CLI-P of 6400. Takes you in here. We can run a ping. It returns a pong. Okay, so that's what it looks like from inside of the Redis container itself. We come over here to the Redis app where we are actually connecting to this, right? So if we want to test this from Rails, what we can do, so to test this from Rails, we can come up here to the testing block for Rails, which has the Redis commands in it. That was my bad. In the testing block for Rails, we actually want to do something similar to this. We start with a Docker exec command. So we'll exit out of here, hit Control L, run this. So it's a Docker exec with the -it flag. We tell it Rails_app as the name of the Rails container. Then we do a bin/Rails for the console to enter the production console. You can see here we get some SQLite and production warnings. Now let's try to create this this Redis client. So say Redis equals Redis.new, takes in a host of Redis_app and a port of 6400. We can do that. And now if we do a Redis.ping, it returns Pong from that client we just created. So we know we're connecting to this. But then in our cable.yaml file, the way that this was working was it was grabbing something from the env.fetch, right? So env.fetch the Redis_URL, which is this URL right here. So now let's try to do a Redis2 equals Redis.new with a URL of env.fetch. And then this is a Redis_URL, something like that. Oops, I forgot the parentheses and the parentheses. And now if we do a Redis2.ping, we can see we're getting Pong back as well using the same flags as our config and our cable.yaml. So in this case, it is actually working. It's actually connecting, and it is a pretty simple setup. If you take out the educational portion of this, it's probably like 6 minutes worth of actual content to follow. But if you don't want to do that, you kind of just use the commands in the README and you change the Docker files to run off of those. That said, try to explain this as best I could. Hopefully this was interesting. Hopefully it was helpful. And hopefully I'll see you in the next video.